author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we will be talking Real ID. Is there method to the madness? And also we'll be discussing the case of Abrego Garcia and why Democrats have wedded themselves to this particular cause. It's going to be quite the show. Remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And you're on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we are very fortunate to have with us today Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donna. Lisa, thanks ever so much for coming in.
Good to be here, Mark. How are you?
I'm not bad. I'm not bad at all. And I'm actually quite...
caffeinated?
I'm always quite
Kidding.
caffeinated. With youngsters in the house, there's no better cure for focus, energy, and attention.
Amen to that.
Indeed. So I'm actually quite excited about the week's stories because we have something that I find is actually it's a very contentious one, but for different reasons. So it's contentious on both the left and the right of the political spectrum, and that's the Real ID. Now, you've written a fantastic piece on this that, by the way, if anybody's having difficulty figuring out what they need to do, go check out LibertyNation.com. Find Lisa's article on the Real ID, because it's chock full of information that's been dragged in from everywhere. So very handy. But the reason it's contentious on both sides is, one, the left doesn't want it implemented because it, well, let's be very clear. It ensures that it's going to ensure that elections IDs must be apparent. So it's really going to hit hard on the illegal immigrant community. But from the right, it's also quite contentious because, who likes ID? Federally mandated identification.
Yeah, it kind of takes you back to papers, please.
Yeah, very much. I mean, that's exactly. There's been a push in the United Kingdom. There's been a push for and they call it the digital ID, because it's going to help you do this. It's going to help you do that. And when, as Ronald Reagan wisely pointed out, the scariest words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Yeah.
And so they've got this idea. Well, in the UK, there's been this push for digital ID for more than a decade. And each time it's been met with enough challenges that it's being pushed down the road. The can's being kicked. But what's your take on the Real ID?
Well, let me just say a couple things. Number one, if you're a procrastinator, you box yourself into a corner. But let me preface the whole discussion with, if you have a passport, you're going to be okay. A passport and a driver's license, you're okay. But ultimately, you do want to get the Real ID because it's just going to streamline things, speed things up. And, people who are moaning and groaning that this is a Trump thing, this is a holdover from the George W. Bush era.
Sure.
And every president has been kicking the can down the road. And now it's time where the rubber meets the road and you got to sign up. So just so you know, I made an appointment for my family about 6 months ago, and we made an appointment at the DMV, which was very convenient to make an appointment instead of waiting in line. Right?
Yeah, I personally haven't seen the movie Zootopia, but
oh my gosh.
I believe you referenced it in your article, and you made an allusion to the
Sloth.
DMV. Yes, sloths are the ones that run the DMV, and I mean it's spread beyond America's borders, and everybody knows the DMV all over the world. Everybody knows the DMV, and they know that it's not a place where normalcy takes, normalcy happens.
Long and complicated. So, you have to bring every state has different rules. So in the state that we live in, you had to bring 2 forms of proof of residency, like a piece of mail that has your name on it. But it better have your correct name on it. Yeah. Like my one son is a 3rd.
Right.
And one piece of mail didn't have the 3rd on it. So luckily my husband brought a stack of mail and we started going through it at the DMV. But it's tricky, because you have to bring 2 forms of ID. You have to also have originals. You can't just bring a photocopy of your birth certificate or something like that. That's not going to fly. And then ultimately, when you go up there and you fill out the form, they sort of send it over to the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. I shouldn't say sort of. I I think they did.
Sure.
They send your information over to the Department of Homeland Security and they give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Now, where people are really getting freaked out is if you're a legal alien.
So as you mentioned, this came in under George W. Bush, and then it wasn't gotten rid of. It was just pushed down the line by successive presidents. And I think part of that is because there's only been one president since then who has openly and proudly declared that we're going to do something about illegal immigration by cutting off pathways that make life more difficult for those illegal immigrants living in the United States. And that's really the purpose of it, isn't it? Is to
Yeah.
make life
Well,
difficult in
well,
the hope
also,
that they'll self-deport.
yeah, also it came up after 9/11. So,
Yeah.
people wanted to know who the hell's on the plane,
Mm.
you know? And so that's really important. But now it's taken on a different life with the illegal aliens because we have so many more in our country. Uh,
I thought it was still the 11 million number that I heard 25 years ago. No, actually, I'm fairly sure that's about 20 or 30 now, but please carry on.
so here's the situation with the illegal aliens, Mark. Um, it's a gray area as to how the situation is going to shake out for them. First of all, can they get on the flight with a passport from somewhere else? Immigration attorneys say, just as long as they have documentation, they should be able to fly domestically. But then Christine Nome comes out. She's like, no, 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 no. You want to go somewhere you're illegal alien? Make sure it's an international flight. Make sure you're going home.
Right.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a gray area.
Mm.
If I was an illegal alien, I'm not sure I would fly right away.
Well, so I believe they're perfectly allowed to get on a flight to leave the country. I think
Right.
that's
That's what Nome said. Yeah.
yeah. So that's perfectly fine for them to do, but it's really about approaching the illegal immigration problem from a number of angles, and Real ID appears to be one of those, that it's making life more difficult for illegal aliens to function in the United States. And there are many other avenues that the Trump administration's pursuing in this as well. But I want to come back to what you feel personally, Lisa, about having another ID that needs to be
I
used
know.
because
I know.
it is an imposition. You had to go to
Yeah.
the DMV, even though you booked the appointment, very sensible. But it's another level of imposition on, come on, this is America, right? This is America.
Right.
We should be able to travel on planes with our bazookas. And
Right. So May 7th is the drop dead date. But
sure.
just as an aside, a friend of mine called yesterday and said that he called the DMV or he contacted them online, and the first available appointment he could get was May 20th. So, you know, it's
It's
going to
like the
be
British
hard.
National Health Service. I need to see a doctor immediately. No problem. We'll fit you in 2028.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you can pay for it if it isn't approved.
Mm, absolutely right.
What happened in the run-up, let me just mention this, is that 19 states, including the District of Columbia, went ahead and decided that illegals can apply for driver's licenses
Yeah.
and get them. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because it's like, wow, should they get, a driver's license? But on the other hand, this encourages them to get insurance and it encourages them to have to pass a test.
Sure.
You understand?
Yeah,
So
it's to limit
that's kind of
criminality. So they're
right.
passing new laws to limit criminality, which is possibly the worst reason I can think of for passing new
Yeah.
laws.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I
many
mean,
people are
I'm not
committing
crazy
this
about
crime. Let's
tons of
just make
forms
it
of
legal.
ID, but I think this is
Yeah.
going to help in the long run. Certainly, it's going to help with voting. Um,
Well, that's the key
you
thing,
know,
isn't it? It's Donald Trump says it's for many different reasons. The DHS says it's for many different reasons, but I think ultimately it all comes down to uh, they want to implement when you go to vote, you got to show a real ID because a real ID has been verified as you're a citizen, you're legally allowed to vote in this
yeah,
election.
boy, it has. It's jumped through hoop time.
Yeah, which, I get there's the argument here, isn't it, that we should make it as easy as possible to vote. Well, you should make it as easy as possible to vote for people who are legally permitted
Eligible to
to
vote.
vote, right?
Right.
But it seems that, for example, there was it the motor voter under Bill Clinton, where
Right.
people were just getting signed up to vote when they go for the driving licenses. Coincidentally, that came in at the same time as illegal aliens can have driving licenses. Surely just a coincidence. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, a problem was created because of this initiative, and now this looks like the solution or a potential solution to putting an end to that problem. Now we're going to continue our conversation with Lisa K. Donner, executive editor of LibertyNation.com. After this short break, don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we continue our conversation with Lisa K. Donner, executive editor at LibertyNation.com. Now, Lisa, earlier in the show, we were discussing the Real ID, and now I want to jump onto a somewhat different topic, although there's definitely crossover, and that is Elon Musk. Apparently, in a shareholder meeting for Tesla, said that he would be taking a minor step back from his DOGE activities to try and rebuild the cratered Tesla stock price. Now, I know a lot of the left-leaning fourth estate said this is it. Musk is gone. He can't do this anymore. But I want to put it to you that Elon Musk is the best multitasker that I've ever heard of. This guy does so many different things. He's got his fingers in so many pies, and he seems to manage them all with some success. And so does this mean that DOGE is winding down, or does it just mean that his direct involvement in the day-to-day running is winding down? I think it's the latter.
Yeah, his day-to-day is winding down, and he said he wouldn't be here forever. But I did think he said he would be here for 2 years. So it seems like he's maybe rejiggered that timetable a little bit.
It's supposed to be up to the quarter millennium, isn't it? The 200-year anniversary. And so I think he'll still be involved in the operational side, because once you get that close, I don't know if this is true of Elon Musk, but it seems to me to be true of just about everybody, is once you're really close to the center of power, it's difficult to step away from that. It's like the ring in Lord of the Rings.
It's the elixir. Right.
And so I think the people who are expecting that the DOGE movement is now over because Elon Musk says he's going to spend 2 days a week working on Tesla, I think they're fooling themselves.
No, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think they're just started in some areas. So he's just digging into the Department of Defense, and he's just digging into, I guess, some IRS stuff. He's just gotten permission to go into some places, but maybe he's got people in place. I think a good captain of the ship has a good first mate.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it's been about, as far as I can tell. That's why there's been so much movement, is that it's about putting the people in the right positions across the agencies, because that was the entire purpose of the original Department of Government Efficiency, started under Barack Obama, and it was to put people answerable to the chief agency in each department, so they could then work on what's the right word, efficiencies through what they're doing. Right. And so once you've got the people in place, like any good business, you should be able to sort of walk away and let your people run it, right?
Yeah, and I think it's going to continue, and they've got a lot more work to do. But he's an efficient guy, and let's face it, he's taken a lot of hits.
Yeah,
and his company has taken a lot of hits, and he has responsibilities elsewhere.
Yeah, I think with Tesla, for example, I believe I read that there was something akin to a 70% drop. I don't think that's completely accurate, but I read that. I think it was in the New York Times of all places. But I think that's like an overall cumulative series of drops. But I don't think Tesla's in trouble, because it's still like the #1 best-selling electric vehicle on the planet, and there's nobody else doing the same things technologically that Tesla's doing. So,
well, it seems like they've stopped, keying them and painting them and burning them, and
if you're about to become labeled a domestic terrorist for it, and the Patriot Act of all things, being applied to you. I think that's kind of.
Well, I think that slowed it down pretty well.
Yeah, a little bit, right?
Start
Little
putting
bit.
some people in the Uskow, right?
So let's talk about the end of DOGE. So it's supposed to finish July 4th, 2026, which is 250 years in 1776, baby. And so there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's the biggest celebration of the last 49 years, right? That it will
Right,
be
right.
for the nation. That there's good optics to that. But at the same point, it's also when the 2026 midterm races begin in earnest. And by that point, I think most of the, if not all, most of, if not all of the primaries will be pretty much decided for that.
Yeah,
So
you're right. You're right. You're right.
it's a great opportunity for Donald Trump to come out and say, this is what we've done with DOGE. If you want this to continue, go out, vote early and often. No, I'm kidding about the often. But that's what he can say to people on July 4th when he's wrapping up
Well,
DOGE.
I will confess, I've never really understood the Democratic notion that saving getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse was a bad idea. I just
Lisa, the
can't wrap
answer
my
is
brain
it's
around that.
because it's our waste, fraud, and abuse that you're getting rid of is how they see it. This is what we've put in place. This
Oh,
is
I
the
see.
pork that we've stuffed into your bills to fight climate change or your stimulus checks plus an extra 50 billion for whatever pet projects we have. And it's what they've put into it. And remember, when people do this pork, I mean, you know this better than I, when people do this stuffing of bills, they're doing it because they've been lobbied more often than not. They've been lobbied to do it by somebody who's doing something for them, whether that's a campaign contribution, a favor, exposure, advertising,
Right,
and
right,
they've been asked to do it for such and such a reason. And then if that gets pulled, well, then what happens to that favor bank?
right. Yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, it just seems like there's so many crazy things going on that they've uncovered,
Hmm.
that it's saving so much money that people should be really thrilled with it.
I have one final question for you on this, Lisa, before we wrap up for the day. And that's, do you think that the American people now have an appetite for cutting waste? Because prior to this, it was the debt's just going to keep growing and somebody in the future will deal with it. I think there's an appetite in America for this now. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think there will be an appetite. We didn't get into the tariff thing, but
Sure.
I think people are going to be happier down the line when
Yeah.
all this is kind of settled. Now it's up in the air and they feel very unsettled, and unsettled is not good. But once, things trade kind of comes back to where it should be, fair trade, then
Yep.
I think Americans are really going to be pleased with it.
The only question is, can Americans handle the MAGA medicine? Lisa K. Donna, thanks ever so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to be joined by Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham J. Noble. Thanks for joining us, Graham.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
So there's one story that's just been... It has dominated the media. It's dominating the leadership discussions within the Democratic Party. And as far as I can tell, they are pinning all their 2026 hopes, midterm hopes, on this particular story remaining an issue, whether it involves the individuals currently in the story or not. And that is the situation with the recently deported Kilma Abrego Garcia, who is common. And I've done a little, Graham, I know this is a story you have talked about before in your writings on libertynation.com and on C5, Liberty Nation's flagship TV show. But I did a little analysis of the media spread and the amount of times that Maryland Man came up on the digital front pages of the left-leaning media. Maryland Man, Abrego Garcia. And I was thinking, Maryland Man? It kind of buries the lead on that one, doesn't it, Graham? I mean, this guy is from El Salvador. He's an illegal immigrant to the United States, and he happened to be in Maryland Does that make him a Maryland man, or is that completely beyond the scope of any discussion about the legality, morality of what's happening with?
Yeah, that's just a red herring, because they're trying to make it, the press is trying to kind of subliminally convince people that this guy is actually a Maryland native. And so they're trying to bury the fact that he's actually an El Salvadorian. But they need to be careful with that, because, sooner or later, the conservatives who love to have fun at these people's expense, they're going to replace Florida Man. You've heard of Florida Man.
Of course. I was about to mention Florida Man.
It's going to be Maryland Man. It won't be Florida Man.
So there is this is
basically it will be a case of for anybody in this country who commits any kind of crime anywhere, they'll be called Maryland Man.
So there's this is completely off topic, but I hope our listeners will enjoy this little aside. There's a game that you can play where you input any date at all of the last 30 years with Florida Man in quotes into a search engine, and it will come up with an amazing story that more often than not involves alligators, beer, firearms, or
running down the street naked, being chased by the police or something. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the next game will be you type Maryland Man, then any given date, and it will come up with some heinous crime committed by a criminal who happens to be an illegal alien. Anyway, that's something to watch for. That's the next game show that I'm watching out for on reality TV. So, Graham,
going to have hashtags, a stand with Maryland Man, and you're all Maryland Man.
I'm just waiting for the T-shirts to come out at the merch shop, Graham. So we have this situation with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, the Trump administration has credibly, I think, accused him of being an MS-13 member. An MS-13, it is as close as you can get to a terrorist organization. I think it fits every definition of that. Mm-hmm. The two courts determined that was not really an issue in question, that he was that. He was arrested whilst hanging out with members of MS-13. And there's this very interesting part where it's like almost like a dissemination within the media where they said the outfit he was wearing, and he was arrested for that because it was like a Chicago Bulls jersey or something. Yeah. And now that's supposed to, there's narrative manipulation behind that, I think, Graham, because that's innocent clothing. You might own that clothing. I wouldn't own that clothing, but you might own that clothing. But then you've got to ask the question one level deeper. Well, he was hanging out, and this is undisputed, he was hanging out with MS-13 known members, wearing a uniform, these clothes that MS-13 gang members wear as part of their uniform. So he was hanging out with them, so he knew them. He knew that was part of the uniform, and yet he was hanging out with them whilst wearing that uniform. That's the second level analysis that you need. And all we're getting from the media is obfuscation, dissemination, and let's be honest, it's kinderlevel garden analysis on this guy's situation. But why do you think that the Democratic Party writ large has decided that this is the hill to die on?
Well, it's kind of weird. I'll just throw in one thing about MS-13, and that is that, generally speaking, you don't hang out with members of MS-13 if you're not a member of MS-13. It's just, I'm sorry, it's just not done. Yeah, MS-13 gang members don't generally, kind of hang out socially with people who are not in the gang. They're a very insular organization. But anyway, so why are Democrats doing it? I think they're doing it simply. I really do think they're doing it. They've decided this is a battle of wills with the Trump administration, and they're literally doing it. They think they can score some kind of victory over Trump if they manage to bring Garcia back to the United States, which I don't see happening at all. And it's rather silly of them to think that they can go to a foreign country and bully the government of that country into sending one of its own citizens to the United States, even when that citizen had a deportation order against him while he was in the United States. Now, where the Democrats think they have that kind of like international, reach and power is beyond me, and I think they're becoming themselves. But to me, the whole thing about it, Mark, is they're literally doing this to spite Trump, and they are determined that in their fantasy world that if they manage to return him to the US, I'm sure they'll have a big parade at the airport if it were to happen, which it's not going to.
Yeah.
But this is all about, just this is to spite Trump. That's it. That's what it's about.
There's a couple of things I want to come back to on that. The first one is you said about if you're not an MS-13 gang member, you don't hang out with other MS-13 gang members. Now, can you imagine if there was, and I just want to run a hypothetical here, can you imagine if there was somebody who was put in prison for hanging around with the Ku Klux Klan or neo-Nazis, and he was just hanging around with them? Would anybody say, hey, I mean, just because he was hanging around with them, and just because he was wearing the same kind of, white robes that they wear, that does not make him a white supremacist Ku Klux Klan member, neo-Nazi. It just doesn't. There wouldn't be this kind of thing. So I think you're right that that's all agenda driving. And then the second point you make about trying to bring him back. Now, let's be very clear. The United States has performed, I believe they're called extraordinary renditions in the past, but that's always been to face charges, not to. Because here's the thing: what's the end game? There actually isn't an end game. Is the point? So let's say, beyond all credibility, the congressional Democrats do manage to do enough court cases, apply enough pressure that Kilmer Abrego Garcia is. Let's say he's brought back to the United States. What happens to him then? Well, he's got a deportation order against him, and now not even Senator Van Hollen or the other leading Democrats who are saying we need to bring him home. And by the way, I should really use the air quotes on the word home there. But they bring him back, and then he faces a deportation order. So he's got to go through the courts, and then he will, almost without doubt, be deported. So that there's no suitable end game other than frustrating the Trump administration. Now, I want to talk about this mass frustration effort after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, continuing our conversation with Graham J. Noble. Graham, we began talking about that Abrego Garcia, the air quote Maryland man, if he were to come back to the United States, then he would be probably, seen through court and then summarily deported. In reality, that's the most likely outcome. So you more than alluded to, you stated openly that you believe that the reason behind this is because Democrats in Congress want to frustrate Donald Trump's deportation efforts. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that. And I'm reminded that Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George Bush, all deported up to, I think it's like 1 million people, maybe more, I think, for Barack Obama during their terms. And what we're seeing now is there's individual cases it's not broad sweeping, although there are broad sweeping measures taking place, but they're individual lawsuits challenging and putting holds on what's happening to individuals. Because if Donald Trump wants to deport 1 million illegal aliens, specifically he's after the ones that are criminal illegal aliens, for which the country is, I believe, according to the latest polling, 55% believe everybody who's illegal in the country should be deported. For those who have committed violent crimes, that number rises to 85%. That is across all parties, all leanings. And so if Donald Trump wants to remove 1 million violent criminal illegal aliens, or however many there happen to be, and it wouldn't surprise me if it is close to 1 million, it seems that they're going to try and launch 1 million lawsuits. And now that 1 million of it, let's say it's 100,000. 100,000 lawsuits that the Trump administration has to contend with. This is about tying him in knots, so he can't actually do anything, right?
Oh yeah, it's very much about that. I mean, it's the broader picture here is literally just grinding the whole Trump agenda to a halt, on all issues. and they've chosen this litigation over these illegal aliens to do so. I will say one thing though, if they manage, and like I said, I don't honestly cannot see this happening, but if somehow they manage to get Garcia back into this country, they'll probably send him on some kind of speaking tour or something. You can imagine they're going to milk it for its worth.
Sure.
But here's the problem. If he returns to this country and between the time he returns to this country and the time he eventually is deported again, which he almost certainly will be, just not back to El Salvador, it'll be somewhere else. But between that time, if he commits any kind of crime, then wow, that is going to be a kind of a death blow for the whole Democrat pro illegal alien narrative. So they better hope, if they manage somehow to get him back, they better hope he acts like a saint while he's here.
Oh yeah, it's funny that they really are tied to this. Now there's a certain element of spin involved. They're saying it's not about the individual. They're saying it's about the rule of law, that people go through due process. How do you do it's kind of funny, right? Because it's illegal to enter the country illegally. That's a reality. And yes, we hear, well, it's not a felony. Well, still, it's a crime, right? So, the people who argue that it's not a felony, well, are they saying that nothing that isn't a felony shouldn't be charged, or the punishment shouldn't be enforced? It's a ridiculous mental path to go down. But you have this.
I can drive, at 100 miles an hour through a school zone. I'm not committing a felony, so should I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Graham would never do that, and does not endorse such a thing. But yeah, that is the point, right? If it's not a felony, then it shouldn't be charged, it shouldn't be enforced. But here's the thing: they've got this situation where they're demanding the rule of law, due process to be followed. Now, what is that though? What is that? It's like an immigration judge rules that you're here illegally, therefore you should be sent back.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, right?
Well, and that's the thing. You see, this whole thing about that, any claim that Mr. Garcia did not get his due process is just factually incorrect. He absolutely did. There were hearings, at least one hearing, I believe 2 hearings, and he ended up with a deportation order against him. And the whole point is he was supposed to self-deport.
Yes.
Basically, well, that's what that order said. That order says you have got to get yourself a plane ticket and get on a plane and go somewhere else. And he could have gone to any country. The one thing, the one mistake that the Trump administration made was that the order said that, he should self-deport to any country, but he cannot be deported to El Salvador. And
right.
Of course, then they sent him to El Salvador. And that was a mistake. They screwed that up. And
oh, yeah.
If they hadn't done that, if they deported him to anywhere else, we wouldn't even be talking about him right now. So to a certain extent, to be fair, the Trump administration sort of brought this on themselves, but now it's just gotten silly. Yeah,
if they're trying to be bold in what they do, they've got to realize, cross those I's, dot those T's, or the other way around, whichever you prefer. But they've got to get it right because they know that it's going to be ammunition against them, right?
Of course, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you might think to yourself, well, there's still a lot of people embedded in the administration and the federal government, as on a wider scale, that are doing all they can to sabotage Trump. So is it not possible that maybe somebody at the Department of Homeland Security actually arranged to have this guy deported to El Salvador specifically because he wasn't supposed to be deported to El Salvador?
So you're right. That is on the verge of conspiracy, which I love. No, I'm kidding. Well, I do, but I'm kidding.
Well, those conspiracy theories have scored an awful lot of wins over the last few years.
Sure, they really have. What's the difference between a sane person and a conspiracy theorist? About 3 months nowadays. So there's actually something to that. There are a lot of holdovers from different administrations who who are ideologically wedded to one party over the other. And that party is not necessarily Donald Trump's Republican Party. Now, what I think is happening, and I think we can see this quite clearly, is it's not that they're breaking laws. I'm not accusing anybody of breaking laws, but they are engaged in what, and I don't know if I made this term up or I heard it somewhere, but malicious compliance.
No, malicious compliance.
Right, that's the thing, right? I didn't make that up. No, okay,
Yeah.
right.
So malicious. No, I know I've heard that. So yeah, and
Right.
you know, and just so people understand, malicious compliance basically means that you deliberately, overzealously comply with certain orders, particularly kind of Trump's executive actions. You overzealously comply with them to the point where it you know, a good example was at the Department of Defense, where they scrapped the whole DEI thing, and then some official at the Department of Defense decided, okay, well, if they're scrapping DEI, then that means we'll have to remove the Tuskegee Airmen material out of the training curriculum. And of course, that was never the point. And when they found out that had been done, they put that stuff back in. But you know, that was a good example of malicious compliance right there. Yeah.
So I think that's what we're seeing, and I honestly I can't see a way that the Trump administration can work around that, other than what he's doing now is offering as many voluntary layoffs as possible, cutting down the departments and getting rid of, well, as many people as possible from the employ of the federal government, which, I mean, there are a great many reasons to do that anyway, in terms of lightening the burden on the individual taxpayer for a start.
Yep.
But to actually remove people who would purposely, overzealously do something with the intention of corrupting it, I think that's also a worthwhile endeavor there to basically push back everything to a bare bones set of organizational structures. Now, Graham, one more question. So, Graham, we've discussed the numbers on this, like 55% support deporting all illegal immigrants, 85% support deporting all those who have committed crimes whilst in the country. Do you think that what the Democratic Party is doing today resonates with voters, or are traditional Democrat voters or Democrat leaners among the independents, are they pulling out their blue rinse hair?
It's hard to even come up with an answer as to why the Democrats are going down this road, and it's basically like the other stuff. It's like the transgender ideology and all of this kind of stuff. It's as if the Democratic Party has decided to kind of shrink its base down to the hardcore progressives, because they're not doing themselves any favors here. And you know, this is one of several reasons why Trump won so resoundingly in 2024. It's because obviously an awful lot of people who usually vote Democrat, although are not on board with all the extremist ideology, they went for Trump. And you know, and that's why the midterms are the Republicans to lose. You know, the Republican Party is very capable of screwing up and snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in 2026. But, you know, really, they only have to keep cool heads, because the Democrats are alienating at least a large chunk of their own base.
Yeah, many of them can't even pass their own party's ideological purity test. Graham J. Noble, thanks ever so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radiohead Coast to Coast on the Radio American Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests, Lisa K. Donna and Graham J. Noble, and of course you at home for taking the time to tune in each week and join us. You are appreciated. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.